Hello, I'm John Roberts and welcome to IABSE in Conversation, where we talk to designers and structural engineers about what inspires them and their life and career. And to kick off our second series, I'm delighted to welcome Finn Graham as my guest. Finn is a structural engineer and project manager whose projects increasingly focus on new and exciting bridges. And after experience in Ireland, the UK and Canada, he's currently working with COWI and is recently relocated from London to Munich. He was recently a winner of IABSE's Nethercot Prize in 2020 for his work on Hamsway footbridge. So Finn, where did this all start? Was there a particular experience in your childhood that nudged you towards a career in engineering?
My gosh, great big question. Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, John. Delighted to be here and to sort of share some thoughts from a relatively new entry to the sort of the series here that's captured decades of experience. I guess childhood experiences. I grew up in a sort of a rural part on the west coast of Ireland. Both my mother and father are sort of artists in different ways. My dad's a wood sculptor, so I have that sort of background to my childhood. And I would say an influence was my grandfather was a mechanical engineer. He always gave me a good steer towards engineering. But I guess it was growing up in an environment where, you know, when I was first born, really, we moved to a barn, you know, and constructed the barn to a livable space. My dad constructed a workshop. Years later, constructed an extension to the house and then an extension to the workshop. So sort of grew up around very small scale building sites and that kind of thing going on. But as well, our house was, you know, I measure it in fields, 3 fields away from any other house in any direction. So, you know, we were really in the middle of nowhere and had, noise wasn't an issue. So, you know, building projects and tree houses and tinkering around with old cars and, you know, different bits and pieces was kind of my childhood, as well as sport. Played a lot of sport when I was younger. So they were the kind of that was my childhood. And I guess by the time I was, you know, into secondary school, you know, doing honours maths in Ireland is sort of a prerequisite to get into engineering, and I was always fascinated with it, interested in it, and as well as woodwork and sort of construction studies. And I guess there wasn't a kind of a pinnacle moment that there was sort of a light bulb that went off that said, I'm going to be a civil engineer. But I guess by the time I did my leaving cert, my sort of A levels in Ireland, you have to fill out a form with your top 10 choices of university, and they were all civil engineering somewhere. So I wasn't kind of dancing around depending on grades and things. I was pretty sure by the time I was 17 that I was going to do civil engineering somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was just, I guess, it felt like a bit of a natural progression from childhood into university.
It must have been an interesting experience, sort of growing up in the middle of a project. I know we a couple of years ago did our own house, and it was all absorbing. And I can only imagine being a child in that. You studied civil engineering at Galway in Ireland, and then you joined a contractor, geographically, in Galway. Now, maybe this question is coming out of the fact I've worked for the last bit of my life for Irish-led companies, but it really feels that Irish universities are a key engine room for British contracting. Now, do you feel there's a different balance to design versus construction, or is it because students in Ireland for some reason are going in with different expectations or traditions?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess it's hard to speak for the masses. You know, Irish people have a history of emigration, which helps. And England's, you know, London and the big cities in England are, you know, they capture a lot of Irish emigration. And you know, in my civil engineering course in Galway, we did a lot of practical work surveying and things. We did placements with, oftentimes contractors had spots for people in university to do work placement and things. I don't know if there's a kind of a straightforward reason why a lot of Irish people end up in contractors in Britain, but I mean, my experience was I graduated in 2012, sort of 3 or 4 years after the big financial crash, and so there wasn't that many jobs available in Ireland, especially not in rural Western Ireland. And I knew I wanted to go abroad at some point, but I wasn't quite ready. The day after I finished university, I wasn't quite ready, but I needed a job. So in Ireland at the time, the design firms, I mean, I was interested in structural design at that point, but there was a lot of competition, a lot of graduates with not very many places, because I would have gone into university in 2008 as the sort of crash was happening. So I had I had over 100 people in my graduating class, but 4 years later, when I graduated, the classes going into university were 15, 20 people. So it really shrunk in 4 years. So there was 100 odd people coming out of Galway and more out of Dublin and Cork and places, with very little design opportunities. But working for a contractor was kind of something like, you rock up to site and you sort of ask, is there any possibilities? And it tended to be easier to get work that way. I mean, the pay wasn't very good, the hours were long, and there was a lot of expected of you, but it was an opportunity,
That's good.
So that's why I went knocking on the door of a contractor. I knew it was going to be good experience to get if I was going to be a designer in the future, but it was, in a way, it was a means to an end in Ireland, because I wasn't going to stay in sort of rural Ireland forever. So I've rambled a little bit there, but I hope I sort of answered that question.
And it's interesting what you say, and I can tell you a good bit of news, because actually in some ways I had the similar experience of the recession in the 80s, where I went through and I stuck with civil engineering whilst a lot of people went off and became accountants and various other things. And as a result, there's not many of you. And there's then always a shortage behind you for the whole of your career. It's almost like there's a gap, because of course, we your age group, it's impossible to breed any more engineers like that. So the good news is, if you're one of the few who stuck with it during that period, you'll always be at your age group slightly in demand. which is good. So out of that, you somehow went from that, where you're knocking on a door asking for a job, to what looked to 6 months later, what looks like a glamour position of basically now you're working for COWI North America in Vancouver, Canada. What happened?
Well, it was all luck in a way, I guess, with a little bit of kind of desire thrown in. So in my final year, I was really looking to finish my university degree with opportunities in a place where there wasn't very many opportunities in Ireland at the time. So I went and got myself a working holiday visa to Canada while I was still in university. I had no idea if I wanted to use it or not, but it was something like €100 at the time, and I thought, why not do this? And then at least I had the option of going to Canada somewhere. So that came through, and as I said, I wasn't quite ready to go when I finished university. Didn't quite know, I wanted to assess all the options. So I went working for the contractor, and eventually, when the time felt right, I guess I felt like my role on the site I was working at was sort of, I was reaching the limit of what I was going to learn on the site, and decided it was time to go. And I packed my bags, and without knowing anybody and without anybody coming with me, I just kind of booked a flight and went. I didn't have a job. I didn't have contacts. I didn't have anything set up for me. I just I was young. I was, had my degree in my back pocket, and I just decided to give it a go. Why not? So, I spoke with people over there, Irish people, who said I did the exact same thing, and now 20 years later, I'm here, still. That didn't happen to me, but So I kind of utilized the fact that I didn't mind going out and speak to people, getting contacts. Do you know anybody who's looking for work, and speaking to people, going for a coffee with people, and growing my network in that way. So when I went over, and before I even left, I started to do that and contact people, just sort of send people emails. Hi, I'm Finn. I'm going to be coming over, looking for a job, etc., etc. And really, the network for Irish people in Vancouver was really solid. There was a decent amount of engineers over there. I met some really interesting people through that sort of approach. And I ended up meeting, 15, 20 different people, whether it be for a coffee or a pint, or, somebody in a decent position where I actually went to their office and spoke with them. But the vast majority were just emails, picking up the phone, getting in touch with people that way. And actually the only job that I applied for through a sort of a web portal or official means was the job to COWI. And I had various different kind of interviews in different ways, but I had this interview with COWI that was sort of official. I had a phone interview with their HR people, and then an in-person interview, etc. And it was the only bridge design firm that I had kind of applied to. I mean, in my university days, I knew I was interested in structural engineering, and bridges fascinated me. But, again, maybe it's the thing about growing up in the west coast of Ireland. There's not very many bridge firms there, so I didn't have my eye on a bridge role. But then it just turned out that I got an offer from COWI in North America. I did this interview with, I sort of subsequently found out that the person who was supposed to be interviewing me couldn't make the interview that day. So I had a different person who told me afterwards, after I accepted the position, that he was sort of fascinated with the fact that I took this job in Ireland for a contractor, knowing that I was going to go and work for a designer. So walking around the site going, okay, and if I was the designer, I wouldn't have done it that way because this doesn't fit here and that doesn't, you can't get the concrete this way and that way. So perhaps that was, the sort of the little detail that maybe got me the job. I've no idea, but was one little detail. So then, accepted the job, and the rest is sort of history. That's how I entered the bridge world.
And so the name of the project that I know about is Ironworkers Memorial Bridge. But what were the projects you were working on in Canada?
So when I started there, I guess I split my time 50-50 at the very beginning between this rehabilitation job, Ironworkers Memorial Bridge, and with a kind of a framework of mini projects to work on the sort of rehabilitations and new designs and assessments of bridges in the national parks in BC and Alberta. So half of my time was just this one bridge, and the other half was assessments and new designs and 3-month projects here and there. The Ironworkers Memorial Bridge was, I mean, thinking back, my time with, it was Buckland and Taylor at the time, who were owned by COWI, but hadn't sort of merged to take the COWI name. It was mostly about obviously helping as much as I could on the projects, taking what I learned in university about physics and structural design and everything, and applying that to the projects. But on the other hand, it was learning how to be a professional, learning how to be in an office environment, how to speak to people, how to integrate, carry out meetings, ask the questions when you need to ask them, don't ask stupid questions, all these kind of things. It was learning how to be a professional. Those 2 years really taught me how to sort of ground myself. You've gone from, an upbringing and then a university life, and now suddenly you're sort of a professional, and it's steep learning curve. But the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge was, we were, the bridge is an old bridge that's, the number of lanes has grown and grown, and the sidewalk has shrinked and shrinked over the time. And the project was to extend the sidewalk on both sides. and so you're putting additional load on the bridge. So various different members needed strengthening. So my job was to take a structural model built in an in-house software package, built back 20 odd years before the project, by someone in the company who was then the president of the company. When he was a graduate, he built this model. So to take this kind of historic in-house software model and develop it into a up-to-date codified structural model, and produce a set of design loadings for this increased wind and pedestrian load. The codes had changed and things, and then feed that into somebody who's going to design the strengthening for the bridge. So
good engine room stuff of design.
Yeah, it was a really interesting project to get thrown into at the very beginning. And then of course there was all the other bits and pieces on the what we called Parks Canada job, which was, that took me up into the national parks, worked on site for a couple of months each summer I was there, which was fantastic. And yeah, lots of little bits and pieces. So it was a good couple of years to kind of to give me a grounding in bridge engineering. I think
I've been to British Columbia once, and I know lots of people go over there and never come back. So, but it's interesting because you've jumped around a lot quite early on, and then suddenly you're back in London and at Imperial College studying advanced structural engineering. Now I'm almost expecting you to say you walked up there and knocked on the door and just good. But why that next? What did you want to gain, and did you gain it?
Why that next? I guess I did. Well, at least I tell myself that I thought I was always going to do that. Particular master's at Imperial. It was the only one I applied for. I sort of knew about it after I had graduated from my undergrad. So to me, the question was just when. And also, do I come back? So at the time, the company, the business model in Buckland and Taylor, COWI North America, was kind of split between big projects and sort of projects that sustain the business. So you might have a huge cable stay bridge, new design or something, like the new New York bridge that was happening at the time, Tappan Zee as it was called. So these projects demand a lot of engineers for relatively short periods of time, and then after the project is over, there's a kind of a sort of like a downtime where the rest of the projects pick up, resource. So at the time I applied, we had finished Tappan Zee bridge design, and there was a bit of a lull. And Buckland and Taylor were always very good at giving these briefings about, what the next 3 months look like, what the next 6 months look like. And at the time, as I remember, there wasn't very much, there wasn't any big tender design or big new design coming in the next kind of 6 months at the time. So I decided it was always going to be, do I apply for this year or do I apply for the next year and wait a bit longer? And we were being told that there was a couple of big jobs coming up in the near future, but really the tender designs weren't going to start for a while. And so I thought, why not head off, go and get a master's, further education, and then put it in my pocket, come back, and then I'll be back for a new design, whatever big projects they won in the time I was away, I would come back and I would work on it.
Yeah.
So that sort of triggered me applying for the master's at that point, and not further down the line, was just project workload. Sounds so dull when I say it out loud, but at the time it was a good idea to me. And then got accepted and headed off to London. And I guess I wasn't sure if I was going to stay in London or if I was going to go back. The idea was you know, the sort of default was to go back unless something else, you know, came up. I wasn't contracted. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a contract to go back. It was sort of left on good terms and said, look, when you're finished, give us a call and you can come back. But it wasn't written down anywhere. So I was free to go and have a look at other things. And so we started end of September, and by Christmas time, most of my friends had jobs. And that, you know, in the course, and that sort of scared me a bit. And I thought, okay, so I'm holding off for this, you know, to go back to Canada here. But you know, what happens in summer if I give them a call and say, hey, can I come back here? I've got my master's, and they turn around and say, well, we're really sorry, but we haven't won any jobs and we don't have space for you. And then I miss out on all of these opportunities that are really being presented to my mates. So I started to talk to a couple of companies, and I spoke with Ian Firth actually at an IABSE event, where you sort of have some senior people in the industry come and speak to graduates. And I told him at that point that I'd come from Buckland and Taylor, who he knows very well, and I didn't know what to do. And he sort of said, well, you know, come and give us a call and we'll have a chat, you know. So I went in and spoke with him and David McKenzie, and yeah, it was just sort of a chat, you know. Who have you worked with over there, and what projects did you work on? And we knew many people. You know, I had worked with people that they knew, and you know, it was all very kind of like, well, look, why don't you just come and work here? And you know, if you want then to go back at some point, there's always this connection. So I thought, great, you know, I'll just sort of have something secure, you know.
It was the bird in the hand, and it didn't rule out.
Exactly. Yeah, and I did, you know, the conversation I had, they were really fantastic. They sort of said, look, if you change your mind, if you want to go back, then just let us know. And so that was a no-brainer. And then, you know, six years later, I think I was still 5 years later, still in London. So I loved it. I started working there and obviously didn't decide to go back.
It's funny what seems at the time like a casual conversation often ends up changing the route of your life a fair bit.
Yeah.
So actually, it's probably worthwhile just breaking there and almost thinking, yeah, I don't know much about straight away. Actually, it's COWI as opposed to COWI. I stand corrected. COWI. What's the structure? What's the roots? It's not an organisation I know about.
So COWI is a Danish firm. I think it started with bridge engineering back decades and decades ago, and they're sort of a specialist engineering consultancy firm, and I mean that's their background. But the sort of on the ground, the bridge business in the UK was once upon a time Flint and Neil, and you know, this was originally a family-run company specializing in structures, bridges, and you know, different sort of complex buildings and different things, and sort of on the edge of the code requirements and on the edge of the research and sort of pushing the boundaries in structural engineering. You know, very successful over the years, and COWI at one point before my time, you know, obviously wanted to break into the UK market and bought Flint and Neil, and then Flint and Neil, or COWI, kept the Flint and Neil name for some time, and when I joined the firm, they were still known as Flint and Neil, but they were sort of Flint and Neil, a COWI company.
Yeah.
So I joined Flint and Neil, and it was run like a family-run company when I joined. It was just bridges and sort of complex building structures and a little bit of stadium work and things. But we sort of had a managing director, and it was just us in the office and things. But quite quickly after I joined, within a year or two, we integrated with our other businesses in the UK that COWI had also acquired. So Donaldson's were the tunnel design firm, and we had a geotech firm that now ended up sort of breaking out to be the sort of marine leg of the business.
Yeah.
So we moved into the same office and integrated our systems, and we're still sort of improving on that. Now we're really sort of what they call one COWI. We're sort of one organization, but over the last 5 years, we've gone from being a family-run business to being, you know, the UK leg of this Danish firm.
Okay. It's a transition I've seen in a few companies. I remember the One Arup campaign, but that's many, many years ago. Another Danish company, actually, so I suppose, strictly speaking. It's going to be all about the Irish and the Danes, this podcast. We're going to end up on bridges, but of course, there's actually, you've alluded to it there. You've got this great project in your portfolio, Tottenham's White Hart Lane Stadium, and in particular, taking out the corner of the existing stadium whilst it's still live to make space for the new stadium to be built alongside it. I'm somebody who's come late in life to construction engineering, so kind of enjoy all that, you know, how you put things together. So what was the balance between the construction engineering bit and designing new stuff? It must have been an intricate dance between the two of demolition and construction at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, this was a fascinating job. You know, I was at a point in my career where I had obviously had this experience in Canada. I'd done a master's. I'd spent a year or so working in Flint and Neil, so I was kind of primed for getting thrown right into this kind of multidisciplinary, very fast-paced kind of job. I didn't project manage it as such, but I was sort of I was the doer, let's say. So the job was, you know, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, White Hart Lane is a very famous historic football stadium in the north of London. And, you know, it held something like 45,000 people or something for Premier League football games. You know, that's a frightening number of people when you're responsible for the structure that supports them and has a roof over their head. And Tottenham were and still are going through a sort of a transition phase where they're building a new stadium and improving their business model and things. And the site for the new stadium was kind of overlapping the existing stadium. So they had taken the car park and the buildings and things beside the stadium, but of course there wasn't enough room. So the footprint was overlapping. And of course, with stadium design, it's all about program. You can't have Tottenham Hotspur Football Club playing in a small little ground somewhere for too long before the fans who, you know, can't get access and TV rights and all these things. You know, the constraints there are huge. So in order to speed up the construction of the new stadium, this project was born, whereby we very simply sliced a corner out of the stadium where they could, you know, where the plan footprint of the new stadium had a stair core, which was on the critical path. We had to get the stair core up in order to get the roof on. So we came in and did the engineering, the demolition engineering, assessment, and new design of bits and pieces to facilitate demolition contractors coming in and slicing a corner, demolishing that bit safely, and everything else being intact, safe, stable for thousands of people to be in the stadium for one season. So the capacity was going to go from don't hold me to these numbers, but 45 odd thousand, and it was going to be reduced by 8,000 or so, or 10,000, and you know, the rest of the stadium was going to be used for Premier League football games. So I guess it was two stages. There was that stage, was the first phase, and the second stage was the engineering for the total demolition the following summer. But the first phase, you know, it required, you know, you have stability systems for the roof and for the stadium that they were slicing right through. So okay, now we don't have any bracing. What are we going to do about stability? How are we going to design a new system? Does the existing truss have enough capacity when you cut it here and everything else is left, and wind and dynamics of the stadium? And you know, there were in places there was very little records of what was actually built, because the stadium was in parts was over 100 years old, with no drawings or information about the stadium, and of course had been retrofitted and stapled together in different places over the years. So there's a lot of site work, a lot of close collaboration with the client, Tottenham, and the main contractor and the demolition contractor, to sort of satisfy all the kind of stakeholders, the fan groups, and the you know, we ended up actually cutting right through the VIP box that Harry Kane's family had access to, and it went from a double VIP box to a single VIP box. You know, it's all things like this that you have to kind of, you know, they're saying, well, why can't we just extend it to here? And you have to explain, well, the structural system, you know. So it was stakeholder management, yeah. And then there was, you know, the aspects of things were, you know, deadlines rapidly approaching, and the Premier League season would start in a few weeks' time, and we hadn't had this done or that done. So you have to do a sketch on a piece of paper, get it checked, and email it to a fabricator, and he would fabricate it the following day, and then the next week you go to site and it's built already. And you know, it's a really fast-paced project. So very enjoyable, and I'd do it all again. But it, you know, it was a good sort of grounding for what followed.
It's one of the things that I've come late to in life, getting involved in construction engineering, and I do like that buzz of the fact that the turnaround is quite something. Now, we've got a whole series of bridges we need to talk about, and absolutely you can't get away. But I was going to say, because I'm somebody who has spent his life on buildings, but I bump into a load of people who just are bridges and bridges. So why is it your thing? And why do you bounce out of bed in the morning wanting to work on bridges? What's the fascination for you?
Yeah, it's I guess they're very honest structures. You know, they are what they look like, and we don't sort of slap things on them as such to sort of make them look good. They're true to their nature. There's, you know, there's nice looking bridges and there's not nice looking bridges, and you know, it's the kind of the innovation end of the scale that I like to sit on, be it, you know, innovation from an aesthetic point of view and a, you know, challenging design point of view, or innovation from material side of things, or, you know, savings on carbon, or whatever it is. I guess bridges in itself is kind of a niche part of structural engineering, but even within the bridge realm, I kind of break it down into you know, repeatable, sort of boring, you know, sort of mundane bridge design tasks, which are absolutely essential and needed. And then perhaps the other end of the scale is more sort of aesthetic and unique and sort of not done before designs in terms of the aesthetic or the materials. And I found myself on both ends of the scale and in the middle. But it, you know, bridges are needed. You know, they help people get from A to B, and it's an honest job. You know, it's needed, and it's fun.
I like that word honesty. It's in some ways, because occasionally I like honest structures, but actually a lot of it gets hidden behind all sorts of stuff and style and curtain walling. So sometimes, yeah, there's kind of your challenges are quicker, but yet in some ways you occasionally get somewhere to hide. Whereas I don't think you do. I know you were mentioning repeatability and then almost contrasting that with aesthetics, but there's several of these projects. Like if we're going to talk about High Speed 2, you've got two very different bridge types you've been involved in, which are the viaducts, multiple spans, and optimizing them is going to be important, but also the footbridges.
Yes.
Very different types. You've been involved in using things like parametric modeling and you know, throwing technology at them to try and pare things down, and carbon's bound to have been important. How's that all been happening with High Speed 2, which of course is a big project for this country at the moment?
Yeah, well, I guess you know, repeatability is not necessarily a bad thing. As you say, if you repeat good design, then you can have multiple good designs. It's not, they don't all have to be unique. My work on HS2, a number of years ago now, I worked on the sort of scheme design of concrete railway viaducts. And again, COWI had, I think, 6 concrete railway viaducts to design, sort of rather similar structures. And I was involved in sort of the structural design and the design of the structures themselves, but the sort of the analysis side of the design process, and optimizing that and developing, you know, parametric scripts in order to feed into analysis models and to repeat things and update things very quickly. And at the time, I guess the plan wasn't to use that approach, but it was something that appealed to me, and I wasn't an expert at it. I mean, I'm still not an expert at it. I'm sort of a novice at most of these technologies, but you know, I know enough to be able to apply them to my work. So that was the scheme design of these 6 sort of repeated railway viaducts. And then what I'm doing at the moment is detailed design of 12 footbridges over the railway. And it's a different kettle of fish, because it's obviously the first one is a rail viaduct, and this is a pedestrian footbridge, so it's very different. The structures look different. One's concrete, one's steel. The constraints are completely different. The design is different, but we have still used a similar approach of kind of parametric design linking to analysis models. And you know, this time it's detailed design. So our deliverables are 3D models and packages of drawings. And you know, it seems, you know, nowadays you wouldn't approach something like this without parametric modeling and, you know, this kind of advanced technologies. So that's HS2, and it's such a massive project in the UK. But there's some really interesting structures and interesting aspects of the project.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's a good link. You mentioned footbridges there, and I always think, in some ways, you know, a viaduct you speed past or you see it from a distance. A footbridge, you're up close and personal to it as a pedestrian. You actually are touching it. So that brings us nicely onto Ham's Way footbridge. You got a lot of coverage for. You picked up the Nethercot Prize from IABSE for it, and I see from the sheets it's picked up a few other awards along the way. It's a lovely thing. So tell us a bit more about the way it was designed and built, and any of the wider aims you had around elegance or sustainability, for instance.
Yeah, so this one, I started working on this project actually after the railway viaduct, the scheme design on HS2, and I was initially supposed to be working on different projects as part of the scheme that Ham's Way is on. It was a precast, pre-stressed concrete highway bridge, and I was going to sort of lead that design, and instead, for whatever reason, you know, resources, I got sort of shifted onto this Ham's Way project, and I was delighted because, you know, it's got a different feeling to it than a highway bridge, and I guess it was the first time I really worked closely with bridge architects. We worked with Moxon on this one, and this sort of approach was a few. There were a few simple architectural concepts that were being expressed in the bridge, and everything else, the structural design, the fabrication, the construction of the bridge and everything else sort of was sensitive to these few architectural concepts. And the thing that I really enjoy about this project is when you look at the very initial renders that Moxon did of their initial concept, our initial concept, and the final bridge, they're almost identical, because the whole project was trying to really be respectful of these simple architectural concepts. You know, the idea of I guess users or the listeners can't see the bridge here, but it's a sort of a bowstring truss arch, and the arches themselves, the cross section is it's a square hollow section, but as opposed to being on the square, it's on the diamond, let's say, and it as the arch terminates at the node points, instead of terminating in a corner, it terminates with a quite a sharp radius, which you know, then the bearings are inset on the end cross beam. So the arch itself kind of looks like it's unsupported as it sits on the piers. So it sort of floats above. And this idea of the square hollow section on the diamond, this is one of these architectural concepts. It's such that when the light hits the bridge, you have a shadow gap or a sort of a difference between light and dark on the upper surface of the diamond versus the lower surface of the diamond, which gives it that kind of lifting sort of feeling. It's sort of designed to look like it's a light bridge, even though it's a big structure. It's, you know, 42 meters over the highway, 6 meter tall arch, but it sort of has this kind of fun, uplifting feeling. And I guess one of the other aspects is that the ramps are incredibly long. You know, in bridge design, in order for the ramps to be accessible for you know, mobility reasons, you can't have just a staircase. You need these ramps to get up to the bridge, and so you're going from it's a high load route, so you have quite a lot of headroom, you know, over the roadway, and so you've got these really long ramps in order to get from footpaths at kind of ground level all the way up and over and back down again. So the ramps were designed as it had this similar language in terms of the edge beam was a rotated square hollow section, but it was very repeated modular 12-meter spans, very simple single kind of lollipop stick like pier that was integral with the foundation, and sort of an expansion joint in the middle, but only bearings at one end, so that, you know, the maintenance of the ramps is really very low. So they were the sort of the main architectural concepts, as well as the parapet, which had its own, you know, almost its own design in a way, with leaning plated steel elements that sort of supported the stainless steel polished handrail.
Yeah.
And all of these architectural concepts were, we worked very hard in the design process to respect them. It would have been very easy to just change that diamond shape to a square shape because it makes all the connections so much easier. It would have been easier to change this curved end detail of the arch to, you know, to come down and meet at a node point, because everything gets much easier. But we didn't. We held on to them, and I guess it's kind of like what I was saying before about Flint and Neil. That's the kind of work that we try to do. We try to push ourselves and push the structure.
Yeah, it's a great looking thing, and I suppose I can never stop looking at bridges and other structures with the eye of a structural engineer, because you end up, but that as you say, that floating support, because it kind of looks, that and the other elements of it look effortless, but I'm also always aware, as you say, the amount of work that goes into effortless is sometimes quite impressive.
I mean, it's I guess in a way it's a bit of a compliment for the bridge to look very simple and you know, at ease, If I look at a bridge and it just looks like it's just been gently placed there, more often than not, that's the one that requires most of the design effort to really work every little detail out.
Yeah, it's very, very, very hard to make things look simple. A lot of work goes in. So really, it's the last project to talk about, which is one I'm very interested in. If you tour a new generation of station footbridges for Network Rail, and in particular, you've been working with the National Composite Centre, which is a place I've visited, and a few years ago, I thought I was going to get a chance to do a project in composite materials, but it went away, unfortunately. So slightly jealous of the fact that you seem to be in there and building things for real. Tell me more about FRP footbridges and of course this, what has always been a bit of an iconic thing throughout the ages. Each era has its own different version of the station footbridge. What are you up to?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating project, and I definitely count myself, pure luck that I'm working on this one. Right time, right place. But this one is back in 2018. Network Rail released a design ideas competition through REBA, and it asked entrants to sort of reimagine station footbridges, and the brief was the constraints of the station were there, but it didn't ask to use a certain material or a certain process or anything. It just kind of asked for ideas for what the future of UK railway station footbridges would look like. So we entered the competition with Marks Barfield Architects at the time, and our solution was very similar to what we've ended up sort of designing and building at the moment, which was an all FRP monocoque shell footbridge, which has listeners can Google it, two staircases up like you would see on a traditional Network Rail footbridge, and lifts at the back, but the FRP shell takes all of the structural loads. And the idea is for these footbridges to be able to be mass produced. They're modular, they're very lightweight, and the whole life cycle, the whole life assessment of the bridge in terms of embodied carbon is very low. I mean, people often think about FRP as being a plastic, and plastics are bad for the environment. But you weigh it up, when you compare it to steel and concrete, it's comparable in terms of the embodied carbon that you produce from cradle to gate when you put the bridge there. But in terms of the weight savings, you're reducing your foundation sizes, you're reducing your transportation requirements, and then the beauty is once it's there, of course, steel corrodes, and we need a corrosion protection system. FRP doesn't. So what's there is there, and it doesn't corrode over time. So I could go on and on about the benefits of it, but we entered that competition with this solution, and we didn't win. So another bridge won, and other bridges got commended, and we were a bit disappointed. But of course, the panel of judges who judge these competitions are made up of people from Network Rail, but also other people, and everyone's got different ideas, and some very good bridges won the competition. But of course, Network Rail, the judges in the Network Rail side really liked our solution, and decided, hey, you know what, we want to progress this, and that's the idea of the design ideas competition. It's not a winning design, and that's what gets taken forward. In fact, a whole suite of different designs have been taken forward off the back of this competition, Futura being one of them.
Yeah.
So at that point, we were in discussions with Network Rail for rather a long time, for a couple of years, developing what we were going to do. We got the National Composite Centre on board, and we ended up, long story short, we ended up with a commission project to design and build a prototype of this structure at 1-to-1 scale. Mm-hmm. So the project at the moment is that we are designing as if it were on a live railway network, but actually it's going to be in a car park somewhere. We're designing this kind of demonstrator proof of concept bridge and fabricating it. I'm going to install it, and we're going to have people come and look at it and walk up it and take pictures of it and scratch it and jump on it, and eventually we will physically test it and burn it and all sorts of things, whatever tests we need to do to prove the concept we're going to do on this prototype. Yeah. And you really, I don't have decades and decades of experience, but I think I can tell that you really don't come across these opportunities very often in your career where you have a design project on your hands, that you have the freedom to try new things out. Obviously, what you're trying out is, has to be safe, and it has to be, practical, and it has to work for the end solution. But in the end, it's a prototype. So the whole purpose of the job is we are trying out new things. And it's really fascinating, the conversations you have when someone has a good idea. There's no bad ideas. We're sort of constantly learning from the National Composite Centre and learning from our client and the architects and us, and collaboratively tossing around these ideas. Why don't we do that? Well, I had this issue, bring this in, and it's really fascinating. So we'll end up building this prototype, and following that, there'll be future stages. The sort of the end goal is that the Futura bridge is a catalogue of kind of like a kit of parts solution where you have different configurations, different span lengths, multi-span, single span, differing platform heights, whatever, and we have you'd be able to pick and choose your orientations and things, and then we'll have, depending on the manufacturing process, we'll have mold tools, or at the moment we're sort of testing with robotic manufacturing methods, and you'll be able to sort of pick and choose your Futura solution for whatever bridge site you're concerned about. And the idea would be that there'll be, in the future, in 10 years' time, we'll see tens, if not hundreds, of these bridges up and down the UK railway corridor.
Not bad for losing a competition, really, is it?
Exactly.
That's a great story. That really is. No, quite jealous of that one. It looks very nice as well. So from what I've seen of it, so I'll keep watching carefully as you develop this catalogue. So really onto the final bit of it. You over this year, which of course has been a very interesting year in the world with pandemics going on, you've moved to Munich, but you're still working with part of the London office. Now, flexibility of location and flexible working, all that sort of things, is a hot issue. How did this come about, and how's it gone for life and work?
Well, how did this come about? I mean, it was the pandemic that sort of my situation develops differently. It started with, I guess, my partner and I lived in London, and then she took a position here in Munich in 2019. And we did this long distance back and forth. So every couple of weeks, either I would fly to Munich and stay for a long weekend, or she would fly to London and stay for a long weekend. And I would work, I'd maybe take a day's holiday and work one day from Munich. And at the time, one day working remotely was kind of, acceptable to work one day, especially if there was certain circumstances. It was
take all your reading with you.
Yeah, exactly. It was, well, I mean, a laptop and a high-speed internet is no issue to kind of work, and with Skype at the time, and so that was no problem. And then the long distance just took its toll on us, and I requested to work a week a month from Munich initially. And so the idea would be that, I could have 2 weekends and a week in the middle, and it would just take away some of the travel. All the time I was thinking of what the final solution would be. You know, we weren't going to do long distance forever and all this. And then on my first sort of trial week, where I was going to trial, you know, working a week from home, which now sounds bonkers, but, you know, at the time, working a week from home, perhaps in other industries, you know, the tech industry and things, it was normal, but in our industry it wasn't. And nobody in my company would have had, or not very many people, let's say, would have had that structure where they had, you know, a regular pattern of continuous working from home hours. And the week I arrived to test out this working from home week ended up being 6 months, because the pandemic hit that, or the sort of lockdown measures in the UK hit that week. So so I spent 6 months last year here, from you know, March until August or something. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. I mean, it was new to everybody working from home, and no one knew, you know, what was gonna happen and how the industry was going to unfold with flexibility and things. It's becoming a little bit more clear now. And during that time, I sort of thought, you know, I'm not going to go back to doing long distance. It's just not going to work. And 6 months was kind of the limit I could be here from a tax point of view without having double taxation, all this kind of thing. So I sort of ran out of time in the end, of time I could spend here without, you know, not being legal, let's say. So I just, it was quite simple, really. Like, I thought, oh dear, I'm going to have to leave, because I have this life in Munich, and I'm not going to be able to work from home. And so I said to my company, I'd obviously love to make it work, but I'm sort of moving my life to Germany, and if we can make it work, great. But if not, then I don't know when, but this is the direction my life is going. And they were super positive straight away. I don't see any, you know, from their point of view, they said, I don't see any issue. We can, you know, we'll just make it work. So it took 6 months or so to work out the details, you know, for the pandemic to settle down a bit, and to work out, you know, tax and contracts and different things and bits and pieces. But in January this year, I moved here permanently, and I haven't been back to the UK since. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's going to be really, that brings us on to the last question, really, because it's interesting to see your evolution. You're pushing the envelope, but all the sort of things that people are talking about, which are possible post-COVID.
Yeah,
we're all in the middle of a massive experiment. So what's next with Finn? In what shape do you think you'll be in? It's always difficult to move too far ahead. Let's go 5 years time. What's your 5 year horizon?
I tend not to have, it sounds very kind of stereotypical, but I tend not to have a 5 year plan. I have no idea. I count myself extremely lucky to have sort of encountered the situations that I have over my life, over my career. Really, the people I've worked with have been incredible. And I guess if there's any 5 year plan, it's to continue working with really, really interesting, very smart, capable, enthusiastic, dedicated people, wherever that is, in whatever, you know, way it evolves. I mean, I'm sort of in a new chapter in my life here in Munich. So the plan is to just kind of keep going here, really. But yeah, I very much enjoy the sort of cutting edge of our, you know, on a technical side, the cutting edge of our industry, new materials, sustainable designs, elegant designs that I would be proud of. And let's see.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. Thanks, Finn. Thank you for being our first guest in this second series, and it's been a fascinating conversation. The format for IABSE in Conversation comes from an idea originally by David Knight. And IABSE are a group of designers and engineers that are passionate and inspired by the world around us, And to find out more, head to our website at iabse.org.uk. And we'll shortly be back with another IABSE conversation. And thank you for listening.